we always talk about the gut microbiome. It's such an important topic, and digestive health, crucially important. And, on social media, a lot of people seem to be struggling with issues related to digestion, bloating, and whatnot. So I know we're going to cover a bunch of different topics today, but let's start with bloating. Why do so many people seem to be bloated so often to the point that it's essentially like a trending topic now on the socials?
Yeah, and there's a lot of validation to that, right, as to the number of people actually. So there's something called the Rome criteria. The Rome criteria is this very well validated criteria of looking at functional dysfunction within the gut microbiome, or digestive function, really, not just the microbiome. And that's how they score IBS severity and things like that, right? So dyspepsia, reflux, all of those things that people feel, including bloating and distension. Rome did a study. They did a global study in 2022, and they found that worldwide, 40% of people qualify for functional dysfunction within their gut and digestive system, right? So 40% of people worldwide have functional, they call it disorders, functional disorders of the gastrointestinal tract. That includes bloating, IBS, and all that, right? So there's lots of data on that. American Gastroenterological Society has also done studies on that. Over 40% of people report. So then you have to ask your question, what is going on in all of these cases? Why are people bloated? And when you start to look at how the digestive system works to prevent bloating, and you start to understand what are we missing in terms of stimulus to prevent the bloating, it starts to become really clear, right? So I think there are three things really that we have to understand. Number one is the movement of food. Right? So we chew, we swallow food, it gets into the stomach, and it has to sit in the stomach for a certain amount of time, but it shouldn't sit for too long, because if it sits for too long, it can start to get fermented. The stomach is an acidic environment, but a lot of people don't produce enough stomach acid, so it's not as acidic as it should be, right? The stomach acid prevents microbes from fermenting the food in the stomach. Now, if it sits there for too long, there's an opportunity for fermentation to occur that can create gas and distension. So now you feel heavy in the stomach, right? The other thing that prevents is it prevents something called the emptying of the stomach, or gastroparesis. So then the stomach doesn't empty efficiently into the small bowel. And when it doesn't do that, then it sits longer in the stomach, it gets more putrefied, more fermented. And then finally, when it moves into the small bowel, you've got stomach acid that's inadequate, and you're not secreting bile and digestive enzymes. So instead of breaking down the food to assimilate the nutrients, we are again exposing them to the microbes to ferment them. And there's a whole bunch of things that go wrong. So at that point, your pancreas, your gallbladder, your liver are not functioning the way they should, and we can cover exactly what they're supposed to do to prevent the fermentation of food in the small bowel, right? So you're getting fermentation in the stomach, you're getting fermentation in the small bowel, where gas is being made, and food is just sitting there for too long. It's not moving, right? So we can think of this as stasis and fermentation that's occurring, and that's probably the main reason why most people bloat.
Now, fermentation is not universally bad, right? Like, it's meant to happen in a specific part of the GI tract.
That's exactly right.
The problem is when it occurs, I guess, in the more in the earlier parts of it.
Yeah, the official term is the proximal part of the GI tract, right? So the nearest to the beginning, and then the distal part, which is the large bowel, that's where you want it to happen. Now, physiologically, the small and large bowel are very different for that purpose, right? So if you think about the large bowel, it's not very long and it's not very twisted. The walls of the large bowel are way thicker, and the density of microbes is way higher, right? So the small bowel, there are a number of mechanisms in place to prevent an overgrowth of bacteria, because we don't want a lot of bacteria in the small bowel. It's somewhere around 10 to the 4 to 10 to the 5 CFUs per gram. What that actually means is around 1,000 to maybe 10,000 microbes per gram if you take a sample of that area. Compare that to the large bowel, it's 10 to the 12. Right, 10 to the 12 is like well over 100 billion.
Wow.
So 10,000 to 100 billion. So the concentration is very different.
Yeah.
The lining of the large bowel is probably 8 to 10 times thicker than the lining of the small bowel. So the small bowel, from a functional perspective, is not at all designed for fermentation. But that is a very common dysfunction. We know it as SIBO, right, which is the biggest contributor to IBS and the biggest contributor to bloating, indigestion, and then even reflux. So reflux is another very misunderstood issue, right? So a lot of people get reflux after they eat. So it sits heavy in the bowel, and then you start to get reflux. What's actually happening, it's not an issue of too much stomach acid, which is, the way conventional medicine treats it, right? It's actually an issue of not enough stomach acid. Because remember, I mentioned earlier, stomach acid prevents microbes from fermenting and prevents microbial growth. And the stomach acid's important to start chopping up the amino acids and the carbohydrates and all that, right? So that we can actually digest it and utilize it rather than allowing it to get fermented. So now you've got not enough stomach acid creating this distension and bloating. That bloating and distension is creating gas pressure that is pushing stuff up. And then the way we're treating it is we're going after antacids, right? Or we're going after what they call PPIs, protein pump inhibitors, right? Or proton pump inhibitors, which then reduce stomach acid production, which makes the problem even worse.
Wow.
Right? And so that's why we have PPI-induced SIBO, and that's why PPIs are a big risk for cardiovascular disease and lots of other things.
Yeah, not to mention increasing risk for Alzheimer's disease and other chronic conditions because they block, among other things, absorption of vitamin B12, various minerals that require stomach acid for proper absorption.
Yep. And that highlights why I think bloating, indigestion, reflux, and here's what the criteria shows, is that the vast majority of people that experience these problems never seek medical help, right? They treat it on their own with over-the-counter products, gases, Gas X and things like that, right? Pepto and so on. The problem with that is that these conditions are actually a canary in the coal mine to some very significant issues going on in the digestive tract. And people will know from even our conversations and lots of information out there and how you just highlighted that digestive-related issues are the early stages of lots of more serious complications, right? So we don't want to ignore bloating. We don't want to ignore indigestion. We don't want to ignore reflux. We don't want to ignore loose stool or stagnation and constipation, right? We don't want to ignore what our poop looks like, right? We don't want to ignore the not going to the bathroom once or twice a day. Those things are all early stages of much bigger, complicated problems.
Yeah. So bloating is generally fermentation in the small bowel, small intestine. I guess you use those terms interchangeably, right?
Yeah.
Bowel, intestine,
and the stomach.
And stomach, yeah. Where it for to any significant degree should not be occurring.
Right.
And then fermentation in the large intestine. In the large bowel, the colon, is that not as directly associated with the sensation that we refer to as bloating?
Right, it's not. Yep. And typically, so most people will experience bloating very shortly after eating, right? Or sometimes within an hour or two. It takes the food upwards of 8 hours to get to the large bowel. So once it gets to the large bowel is when you actually feel better. The food is moved out of those areas where it's acting in a problematic fashion. It's in the large bowel. Now, people with large bowel disorders, so if they have like inflammatory bowel conditions, they have microbiomes that produce too much hydrogen sulfide, for example. When the food gets to the large bowel, that's when they'll start seeing the bathroom urgency, right?
Yeah.
So the people that have chronic diarrhea, so then that's when they'll have to run to the bathroom and deal with that issue. But normally when the bloat is alleviated, it means the food has moved finally from the stomach, small intestines, moving to the large bowel.
Why do some people get flatulence after eating something? Like, there's the whole lore that you eat a bunch of beans or broccoli and then you get flatulence right after. But that broccoli, the beans are still in your small intestine, I would imagine.
Yep.
So what's like the cascade of events that would lead to somebody developing like chronic flatulence?
Yeah, so that is an enzymatic degradation of the types of carbohydrates that are found in beans. So there's a product, very famous product on the market called Beano, right? It's an enzyme called an alpha-galactosidase. That enzyme breaks up these alpha-galactoside bonds that are the unique bonds in the carbohydrate structure of beans. Now, if you don't make enough of that enzyme or you're not secreting enough, what tends to happen is the way it gets broken in a non-favorable fashion that releases gas from the carbohydrate. So you can release hydrogen gas, and it's typically going to be hydrogen gas that you release. It's not going to be methane unless methanogens within the gut start modifying it. But what happens is you eat beans, you eat broccoli, you don't have the right enzymes to break it down properly. Your enzymes or your microbes in the gut will start breaking it down in a different way. That's going to release gas from the bonds. That gas is going to be immediately available for you to come out, whether it's burps or through flatulence. That's not a fermentation process. That's a digestion process. So that's an enzymatic breakdown.
Is there anything anybody can do if they feel that they have excessively smelly farts?
Yes, so they really, really want to improve their gut microbiome, and they should increase their fiber intake, right? So
increase their fiber intake.
Increase the fiber intake, yeah, and it's a little counterintuitive, right? Because you're like, okay, when I eat things and I ferment it, which is what you would do with fiber, I get these excessively bad farts. Now, a lot of times, really bad flatulence smelling farts is going to be sulfur induced, right? And that means that those individuals have a lot of sulfate reducing bacteria. So what those bacteria are doing is they're metabolizing the sulfur groups in foods, and then they're creating hydrogen sulfide, which can then lead to gas production that smells like eggs and smells like, rotten things.
Yeah, not good.
Right, not good at all. But when you increase fiber intake, you'll actually increase competitive microbes that reduce the sulfate reduction.
Wow.
And so increasing diversity, right? So healthy farts really shouldn't be that smelly. They shouldn't be the kind that clears a room. And they certainly shouldn't be the kind that you yourself cannot stand, right?
Yeah.
That's when you know that your farts aren't really healthy. Normally, we're designed to be able to handle our own fart smells, right? Other people's are worse. But if you fart and you can't stand your own smell of your own fart, then you're like, okay, I better increase my fiber intake.
No, I mean, some people listening to this might think that this is a cheeky conversation. It's taboo, but I think like a lot of people do struggle with this.
They do,
and probably are wondering if there's anything that could be done, because it can be socially uncomfortable.
Yep.
It can lead to self-isolation.
Yep.
And there is also this I guess dogma that I see sometimes perpetuated in the vegan community, that like farting excessively is actually a positive thing.
Right.
That it's a positive, it's a sign of a microbiome doing what it should. And I think there's maybe a morsel of truth there.
Yeah.
But, gas is normal to some degree, right?
Yep.
But an excessive amount of it seems not so normal.
No, an excessive amount and really terrible smells is a sign of a couple things. Number one is that you don't have a high diversity of microbes metabolizing the carbohydrates, the starches, and so on, the fiber particularly, right? Because what you're getting is primary fermenters. So the way the microbiome is designed is that you've got these different layers of breakdown that occur, right? So you've got primary fermenters that break down some of the big macromolecules, and then they create compounds that then the secondary fermenters break down further. And so if you're getting a lot of flatulence and you're getting really obnoxious flatulence, what it tends to show is that you're not getting the subsequent breakdown, because that's where some of those gases get used up, right? And you shouldn't have a whole lot coming out. So a great way to test this for people is it's like if you don't eat a lot of fiber, which most Americans don't, right? We eat somewhere around, the average American's around 6 to 8 grams of fiber a day. If you double that in a given day, you'll feel a lot of flatulence, right? And you'll see the smells and things like that. You'll see the disturbances and all that.
Like the sudden increase.
The sudden increase, right? But if you increase it by, like, say, a gram a day over the next 8 or 9 days, you won't see the same effect. And that's because what you're doing is you're slowly upregulating the secondary, tertiary fermenters, not a sudden impact that just the primary fermenters break down and then everything comes out as gas. You have to activate those other layers of fermenters, right? And that takes time. Because they're usually sitting dormant. They don't have the food coming in. You're not feeding them enough fiber. So their levels start to go low, but over a few days, you can actually bring up their levels by slowly, incrementally increasing fiber.
Wow. For me, cruciferous vegetables, alliums, things that would otherwise be beans, legumes, foods that would otherwise be triggers for others, I handle really well, but a trigger for me is just overeating in general.
Yep.
Is that a function of, maybe a lack of? I think I do have pretty good stomach acid, if I had to guess. But what could be driving that in the context of overeating?
Yeah. Actually, so there's a couple things, and I'm exactly like you. Like, I can really handle a huge diversity of foods. Like, there's very few things that give me indigestion, but overeating is a really disruptive thing to my system. Overeating creates an environment that increases leaky gut. So we've seen this, right? So there are studies that show that if you eat an excessive amount of calories in a single meal, and let's say that meal has, and it's slightly different for different individuals, but let's say that meal has a lot of fat in it versus a lot of sugar, a lot of carbohydrates, you can trigger significant leaky gut in individuals based on the macromolecular content of the meal and the fact that there's just too much of it, right? So for some people, it's going to be a meal that's really high in fat. Some people, it's going to be a really heavy meal that's high in sugars or carbs. It's going to trigger intestinal permeability. And we can measure this in the lab, and we've done this. So when we want to test people for susceptibility to leaky gut and intestinal permeability, we actually make them overeat. We give them about a 2,200 calorie meal. And we've done it with different things. We'll give them a meal with really high fat, or we give them a meal with really high carbohydrates, and we see the same kind of response, right? It's basically an overtaxing of your system. And the system goes into a little bit of a panic mode. And one of the things that occurs in that case is the immune system gets overtly activated because there's just too many things in the digestive tract that now the immune system's kind of panicking about, right? Because it's the job of the immune system to monitor what's coming through. And so now you get this overactive immune system. You get high degrees of inflammation in the lining of the bowel. The lining of the small bowel tends to open up. You get a lot of endotoxins moving through, entering the liver. The liver undergoes too much taxation, and so the liver starts producing fat and triglycerides to try to compensate and store all these excessive calories that are coming through. At the same time, it's not producing enough bile because now it's overtaxed on the metabolic side. It's not producing enough bile. So as a result, you're not digesting and assimilating the foods appropriately. And without enough bile, the small bowel bacteria start to grow. And because the overeating also slows down the bowel a lot, right? It's hard to move that bolus of food through. Now you've got more time for that food to sit in the small bowel. Microbes are overgrowing because bile is really important in keeping the microbe level low. Now you're getting fermentation in the small bowel that we would normally not get. Right? So now you're feeling, because of the endotoxemia and the leaky gut, you're actually feeling like feverish. You can feel really down and tired, right? You can measure that in the blood as a massive increase in inflammatory cytokines.
Wow.
Right? You're corrupting the digestive process because bile is not flowing. The signals between the gut and the brain to tell the brain to tell the gut to move aren't going through because of the increase in endotoxins. And then your immune system's overtly active, right? So there's a number of things falling apart there. And in fact, studies show that overeating in any given meal, certainly on a day-to-day basis, right? So if you're looking at like total caloric intake in a day, you can easily overeat through 7 or 8 small meals, but doing it in one big meal is actually even more detrimental because of all these effects.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, there are certain cuisines and contexts in which I know that I'm going to be producing some pretty noxious smells. And that is, for example, when I go to Korean barbecue, and I love Korean barbecue, but I tend to overeat.
Yep.
Tons of protein, tons of fat, lots of added sugar from the marinades,
the sauces,
gluten, sugar. And then on top of that, you're eating, of course, all the kimchi and the fermented food. So that, to me, that's just like a gut bomb of where I know I'm going to need to self-quarantine after it. But it's usually worth it.
Yeah.
But, and I would say it's probably a net healthful cuisine to consume because of all the protein and what have you. But Brazilian barbecue is another one where I tend to, because it's all you can eat.
Totally.
So whenever I'm just like overstuffing myself, generally with like high protein foods, I know that I'm going to be paying some kind of consequence.
Yeah. And the same for me with Indian food. If I go to an Indian restaurant, I know I'm going to overeat, and there's a lot of oils in the curries that they use. There's a lot of carbohydrates I'm consuming through the breads and so on, right? And then of course there's a lot of curry, and generally the ingredients within the curry are good for you, the turmeric and all that, but it can also be an irritant if you eat too much of it, right? So the volume makes such a big difference. If I go and I'm really diligent about not letting myself feel full, I'm 100% fine.
Yeah.
Right? And I go about my day, but I don't get to eat Indian food every day. And so when I do, I'm just gorging myself.
100%. Yeah, me too. And like both of the cuisines that I listed for me, the triggers for me, Korean barbecue and Brazilian, they're both all you can eat essentially. Yeah. With Korean, it's like the sides, the apps, and the meat. Me and my brothers, we tend to overorder all the time pretty much, but yeah, that's so interesting. So how do we then optimize all of these various digestive juices, enzymes, bile acids, hydrochloric acid in the stomach?
Yeah.
Set us on the right path.
Yeah. So and this is, so we had developed a product to help with this, right? And this was a selfish wish of mine because, as you probably know, I take a lot of care of my digestive system, my microbiome, and so on, and understand the implications of them. But one thing that was absolutely missing in my own personal regimen was the use of bitters. Like most people, I don't enjoy bitter food so much. I might have some arugula and some dandelion root or something like that from time to time, but I generally don't enjoy bitter foods like most people don't. And so then you start digging into, well, what is the importance of bitter foods, right? And then what you come to find out is that there are bitter taste receptors. And I know the fact that they call them taste receptors is a bit of a misnomer because now you think they're primarily on your tongue, but they're not. So you've got some on your tongue, but you've got them throughout the digestive tract, right? So your stomach, your pancreas, your small intestine, your large intestine, your liver, even your immune cells in your gut have bitter receptors on them. Wow. Right? So there's a myriad of activities that bitter receptors are responsible for, and it accounts for almost 50% of the digestive signaling and drive to release pancreatic enzymes, bile, hydrochloric acid, to move the bowels, to activate GLP-1s, PYY, CCK. All of these are hormones that activate fat burning, satiety, insulin sensitivity, and so on, right? 50% of the digestive signaling is supposed to come from bitter receptor binding, and we have no bitters in our food anymore, right? So this is why that Rome criteria study shows that 40% of people worldwide have these common digestive issues. We're simply not triggering any sort of stimulus to digest food, right? On top of that, our meal hygiene is horrific. And I don't mean cleanliness. What I mean is how we are designed to eat, right? We are designed, our ancestors spent a lot of time and effort gathering food and assembling a meal, right? They didn't have the luxury of quick things. And so imagine all the energy and risks they put into going out there and getting food, whether it's hunting, gathering, killing things, and so on. Then they bring it all together, and then they sit down. And when they sit down, the work is done, right? They're no longer in that sympathetic drive mode. They're now in the parasympathetic mode. And they're sitting down, and then they're actually enjoying the smells of the food, the look and the feel and the taste. And remember, they likely really needed the food at the time, right? So we have the luxury of just overabundance of food. So we don't go through that kind of fasting, starvation, that mouth-watering sensation. Those are all called the cephalic responses. So we're supposed to have a strong desire for food. When we see food and we smell food, we trigger the cephalic response.
Cephalic means head, right?
Cephalic means head. Yeah, exactly. What that means is that there's a connection between your eyes, your nose, your auditory and olfactory system, and your head, and then your brain turns on digestive processes. The biggest thing that the cephalic response does is increases salivation, right? If you have a dog and cat, you put that bowl of food in front of them, they're going to start drooling, right? And we do it too. You probably do it before Korean barbecue as you're sitting there waiting. Yeah. And so that cephalic response gets us ready to accept the food. And also we have to be in a parasympathetic state, right? Because that's called the rest and digest state for that reason, because we can't activate digestive function in the sympathetic state when we're running and busy and all that. But what do most of us do? We don't sit down and actually, appreciate the food and really enjoy the meal. we are rushed, right? We're eating on the go. We're eating quick. So we're supposed to chew a number of times. We're supposed to allow the cephalic response to get it started. And then we're supposed to have bitter compounds in our diet because the bitter compounds will activate about 50% of the digestive process, the release of hydrochloric acid to begin with, right? So we can make enough stomach acid. Then once a food is in the stomach, the emptying of the gastric system, so moving it into the small bowel. Once in the small bowel, the release of pancreatic enzymes, of bicarbonate, of bile, and then the movement of the actual food. And then the dampening of the immune system because we don't want the immune system to attack the food. Anti-inflammatory effects of the bitter compounds. And then on top of that, it also activates all of these peptides, receptors like GLP-1, PYY, and all that to tell our brain we've got enough food, stop producing the hunger hormone. Let's activate the metabolic system to turn on fat burning, to turn on detoxification. Bitter compounds upregulate phase 1 and phase 2 of the liver's detox system, right? So we're cleaning up the system as we eat. All of these wonderful things that are supposed to happen, we don't do any of it, right? Starting with the cephalic response, starting with the meal hygiene of being able to sit in that parasympathetic state, chew, be calm while we're eating, and then we have no bitters.
Wow.
Right? So hence, we have a myriad of digestive issues that are so common.
I mean, it makes perfect sense. And correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of these bitter compounds would have naturally been in the food supply prior to, I would say, the advent of modern agriculture, where many of these compounds have been effectively wrung from foods, right? Like our modern vegetables are probably a fraction as bitter as they used to be, because bitter is generally, as you alluded to, it's not a taste that most people generally appreciate. And even fruits, like fruit is being bred for, artificially selected for its sugar content, its sweetness, and the bitter compounds that would have otherwise naturally been present, I'm assuming, are being diluted by sugar and all this stuff. So on top of the fact that we're always eating on the go, and people are generally consuming fewer fruits and vegetables than is recommended, the fruits and vegetables themselves have become depleted of these important compounds.
That's exactly right. And you think about all our grains, right? Grains naturally have bitter compounds within them, but they've bred them out so that they increase the starchy carbohydrate content that actually has a more sweet palate, that has a more fat mimetic quality, right? So it has a higher gel formation. And like you said, the fruits have been bred to be more and more sweet over time. Strawberries and most berries and all that tend to have bitter components to it.
Well, consider anybody listening to this who's ever tried a crab apple.
Yeah.
Compare that to like a modern Honeycrisp apple.
Yeah.
Like a crab apple is way more bitter.
Totally.
And you can actually go to Google Images and look up ancestral versions of various plants, whether corn, watermelon, broccoli didn't exist. Right. Broccoli's a man-made creation, right? Probably a tiny proportion as bitter as whatever its ancestral plant was. So yeah, this is fascinating.
Yeah, and so talking about the evolutionary significance of bitter receptors, right? Because it's so interesting when you think about, like I mentioned, 40 to 50% of the digestive signals to release all these important digestive secretions, to move the bowel, to activate the immune system in the right way, to activate the satiety signals and the metabolic signals, we've outsourced all of that to bitter compounds to turn on for us, right? We can't turn them on ourselves. So why would that be? And it signifies the omnivorous nature of our ancestors, because they foraged and they ate things, and some things they ate were toxigenic. And virtually every toxin that exists is a very bitter astringent compound, right? So that's one of the reasons why we have bitter taste receptors in our tongue. It's to activate this spitting out action, right? If you eat something that's actually toxigenic. And then there was a slow evolution from that, where if you ate something that was marginally toxic, what your body would want is would want to slow down the digestive process, create more digestive secretions, activate the immune system, and activate the detox mechanisms in the body, right? That is in case it needs to protect you from that potential compound. And so there's this evolution of bitters and bitter receptors forming throughout the digestive tract as a way and a signal and a checkpoint to understand where we are in the digestive process, right? So your brain can respond adequately to where you are in the digestive process. The activation of bitter receptors in the digestive tract sends signals, neurological signals up to the brain through the vagus nerve to tell the brain, okay, this is a time to stop producing the hunger hormone ghrelin. This is a time to secrete adiponectin, which is a satiety hormone that also activates something called AMPK, which activates fat burning throughout the body. It sucks in sugars through insulin receptors, right? And makes cells take up glucose, so you don't get a high amount of glucose spike after your meal. It activates the immune system to protect and watch out for potentially harmful things. And then it activates phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 detox within the liver itself. So it's like this beautiful orchestrated system that requires signaling in the gut to go to the brain. The brain doesn't independently know where you are in digestion, right? And that's maybe the biggest misnomer. So if we ate food that has no bitters in it at all, the food's in the stomach, the food's trying to move into the small intestine, the brain wouldn't really know where we are in that process. It wouldn't necessarily even know where the food is. And wouldn't know when to release the adiponectin, when to stop the ghrelin production, which is one of the reasons why people overeat a lot, right? Is you can have an overeating as a result of endorphin release, which is what we get when we have meals that we absolutely love. But we also don't generally overeat, right? We don't overeat typical meals,
right? Because
we don't have that excitement, that endorphin, that
dopamine.
You said, the dopamine release, right? And you said you do it with your brothers, for example, right? And same thing with me. If I'm going to like a lunch at an Indian restaurant, if I'm by myself, the likelihood of me over-ordering and overeating is very small, right? If you're going with your friends and your family, it's a celebratory thing. It's dopamine all over the place, right? It's that endorphins all over the place. So that's going to kind of overcome some of the other chemistry around digestion.
Also, brothers like farting on each other.
Exactly, yes. And there's challenges involved in who can eat as much, and so on. And so that's a social thing, which is different. But on a day-to-day basis, for most meals, if you don't get the adequate satiety signals, you will overeat without knowing that you're overeating. And that's one of the foundations of why this country is so overweight and obese, right? So we're eating these calorically dense foods that are non-nutritive, that don't have any components within them that signal to the digestive system that we have enough of it. So and it's highly palatable, right? So we're stoking dopamine through the experience of the food, and so that's getting you excited, makes you want to eat more, and there's no counteracting signals coming from the food itself through the bitter compounds, right? So we've really set ourselves up for failure metabolically, because not only have we removed bitters from our digestive from our foods, we're also created foods that are hyperpalatable and very calorically dense, with no nutritive value, right?
Sounds like a perfect storm.
Perfect storm.
Obesity, for glucose dysregulation, type 2 diabetes, prediabetes, which so many people are struggling with. So how do we bring these bitters back into our lives?
Yeah. The most common form that people see are the tinctures that you can get at the health food stores, and they're fine, right? You can utilize them with a certain degree of benefit, but the problem with those is a couple-fold. Number one, they really activate the bitter receptors in the mouth only. You're not getting a whole lot going through the rest of the digestive tract, right? And I mentioned that the stomach, the small bowel, the large bowel, your pancreas, your liver, and your immune cells in the gut all have bitter receptors on them. So you want to be able to activate bitter receptors throughout all of that. You're really not getting that out of the tinctures. The tinctures also have alcohol in them, typically. So for some people, that's an issue. And then it's inconvenient to travel with, right? You're not going to carry a liquid bottle of tinctures with you to a restaurant. Yeah. And so for us, we said, okay, let's get a really complex set of bitters, about 12 different bitters, because they all do slightly different things. And let's put it in a formula at clinically relevant doses in a capsule. So we created this digestive bitters product that is very comprehensive, that activates all different forms of bitter receptors.
Wow.
And it's in a capsule so that it actually dissolves in the proximal part of the small intestine, and some in the stomach as well. So then you're getting bitter receptor binding in the stomach, small bowel, large bowel, pancreas, liver, gallbladder, and immune cells.
Wow. So you don't actually need to taste them for them to do their job.
You don't need to taste them. The ones in the mouth are very, very much responsible for activating the salivary response and to ward off anything that may be a toxin. But we don't have that issue anymore, right? And so you can also activate the salivary response through the cephalic component, which is the smelling of the food and all that. So my recommendation to people is, okay, step one, let's improve our meal hygiene, right? If we can, we should sit down and have a small ritual before we eat, right? I would start with deep diaphragmatic breathing so that we can activate the vagus nerve and try to activate the parasympathetic system. And it sounds kind of hokey and it sounds like new age stuff, right? But it's so important to put our system in the right rest and digest mode, right? So sit down with the food, appreciate the look and the smell of the food, assuming you're eating something healthy and something that looks beautiful, right? That triggers that cephalic response. So you get the salivation and you start getting some hydrochloric acid release, and your body starts shifting towards the parasympathetic, right? That is really important for meal hygiene, and give yourself time to sit and eat. And then you use the digestive bitters about 10 minutes or so before you're actually taking the first bites of food, right? So imagine you sit down, you take 2 capsules of the digestive bitters, and then you spend the next 7 to 10 minutes kind of doing some deep breathing and really kind of trying to bring your activated mind down, right? Getting your body ready for digestion. Then you start eating. So now the bitters have gone in. They're starting to do their work of releasing all the digestive secretions and all that, getting the bowels ready, getting the immune system ready, telling the liver, hey, food's coming through. Let's get the bile acids going. Telling the pancreas, food's coming through. Let's start activating pancreatic enzymes. And then telling the brain that, hey, we're eating, brain. And food's going to be moving into the stomach and then the small intestine and so on, right? And then all of these peptide receptors like GLP-1 and all that are starting to get activated and expressed. And so now you're prepared and you're ready to eat. And then you start eating and you eat slowly. You chew your food well. You don't suck in too much gas while you're eating. And you try not to, be too active and running around. Like sit down and appreciate it, right? That alone will alleviate so many digestive issues that people face. That 40% of the global population that has Rome criteria for digestive disorders, a huge percentage of that will go away just from having this type of meal ritual, right? And I know it's not always practical, but some component of it. And if nothing else, at least take the digestive bitters.
Wow. No, I'm so excited to try them, actually, because it makes perfect sense and it checks out with all the, everything that I've come across in my own research. Where would you stack these in the context of, a lot of people have seen HCl, betaine HCl on the market, as well as digestive enzymes themselves.
Yep, ox bile sometimes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, how do you kind of triage the approach, given all the options there are on the market?
The way I would look at it is I would do the digestive bitters as the preparation for food. So if you can, 10 to 15 minutes before you take your first bites. I would use digestive enzymes, betaine HCl, and ox bile if people use them. If they have gallbladder or liver issues, they may be using supplemental bile. I would use those with the first bites of food. So you do the bitters beforehand. Then you try to get the cephalic response going. You try to calm the nerves, get yourself back into parasympathetic. And then with the first bites of food, I would use those other digestive aids. And then that's when I would also use the probiotics, because you want the spores going in with the food as well, right? And then after the meal, one of the best things you can do is movement, right? Go for and this is, ideally, it's about 15 to 30 minutes after you eat, you want movement. What I did, for example, last night, I had kind of a heavy meal in my hotel room. I didn't have time to go out for a walk, so about 15 to 20 minutes after I ate, I just did wall sits. In the hotel room. I did wall sits, push-ups, wall sits, push-ups, for about 15 minutes, and that dramatically reduces that postprandial insulin and glucose response, right? And activates the metabolic system in the right way. AMPK goes up. Your body goes, okay, let's pull in glucose and let's start burning fat. Let's store glycogen, right? It's making your muscles want to store glycogen because you're burning glycogen from the muscles. So all of these really healthy things that occur. And really, at the end of the day, that's what our ancestors all did naturally, right? And our system has evolved to require that process, and we do none of it, right? None of it. We eat fast. We eat big meals. We don't have any digestive bitters. We don't have any meal hygiene. Typically, after a large meal, we're just sitting down. We're at our desk or our office, and we're not moving. So everything is disrupted. No wonder the majority of people have digestive issues.
Yeah, no, you're right. And regarding what you were describing exercise-wise, I mean, there's like really good clinical data on exercise snacks.
Yep.
That's what they're actually called in the literature. People could check them out. Just like a brief bit of exercise pre or post meal can do wonders for blood sugar homeostasis, insulin, and the like. I appreciate that you described like the sort of kitchen sink approach, with the bitters and the HCl and the what type of person is that stack meant for, and is there a more pared down version for just somebody looking to subtly improve maybe how their digestion is functioning?
So the full approach that we talked about would be really ideal for anyone that experiences chronic bloat, constipation, loose stool, indigestion, and has an issue with a lot of foods, right? So they would say, like, I hear people say this to me all the time, like, I do fine, as long as I don't eat this, and they list like 15 things that they can't eat. Or people that have accepted and learned to live with digestive discomfort. And that's the majority of people, right? So they have digestive discomfort. So they have bloating, they have reflux, they have distension, uncomfortable distension. They get indigestion, so a lot of that gurgling, kind of loose bowel feeling after they eat. But most of them just accept that that's them. They think, that's my system. That's just how my system works. They never look to improve it outside of maybe doing some masking with over-the-counter products, which, of course, don't go to the root of the problem. For those individuals, I would really try to spend some time, at least one meal a day, doing the full bore, right, that we talked about. For the majority of other people, if you're relatively healthy, your gut works kind of well, and you just want to improve it, everyone else could use digestive bitters. Because it goes back to that idea that 50% of the digestive signaling comes from bitter receptor activation. And an kind of an underlying issue, even if you don't feel digestive symptoms, an underlying issue of not activating those bitter taste receptors is the improper assimilation of nutrients. Now you end up getting an incomplete digestion, a dysregulation on how much of the nutrients within the food that you can actually absorb. So just as an example of that, if bile isn't circulating enough and your bile acid pool isn't being recycled during the digestive process well enough, which involves the liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas to a certain degree, then you can't absorb your fat-soluble nutrients. Right? Bile requires that. You can't absorb fatty acids well. You can't get the healthy fats into your system because all of those require emulsification to come across the gut lining, which is what bile does, right? So the body is generally a water-soluble system, right? Hence why we have cholesterol in carriers like lipoproteins and so on, because you can't transport lipids throughout the body. You can't transport it across the intestinal tract. You need carriers and you need emulsifiers. That's what bile does. So you're not getting any of your fat-soluble vitamins or nutrients coming through. You're also not going to absorb most of the polyphenols. You're not going to absorb most of the carotenoids well. Many of the carotenoids are fat-soluble, right? So these are the powerful antioxidants within the foods. And that is going to lead you to actually increase cravings. You're not going to get the nutritive satisfaction from the food. So your brain goes, hey, we're still low on all this stuff. You got to eat more.
Wow.
Right? So that is an underlying issue. Even if you don't feel all the really disturbing symptoms, you're just not assimilating the nutrients well.
So you're saying theoretically they might help to prevent overeating because they're gonna clear away any potential roadblocks to your body sensing nutrient repletion from your meal.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and there are feedback loops in your body for nutrient sensing. And the presence of nutrients, because most nutrients will bind receptors as well, right? Whether it's cellular receptors on cells that are floating around the body, or on specific cells, like say your muscle cells. For example, amino acid binding in the muscle cells, right? When your muscles, when you exercise and you do damage to your muscles from weightlifting, which is what you want, the adaptive change is the activation of mTOR, right? mTOR is telling your muscles, hey, we need amino acids, right? And let's say you eat. You're going to go out and eat a bunch of steak and chicken. You're like, all right, I'm going to get my amino acids in, right? But your digestion is insufficient where you can't break up the protein to release the amino acids. You can reduce the amount of protein you're absorbing from that steak or that chicken by almost 30%. So you're looking at your macros and you're going, I need to get 100 grams of protein a day. So I'm eating this much steak, I'm eating this much chicken, I'm eating this much cottage cheese or whatever it is. But if your digestive system isn't working efficiently, you're not turning on those signals through the beta receptors, you're absorbing 30% less of those proteins. Your muscle is going, hey, I don't have enough amino acids. There's not enough leucine. There's not enough branched chain amino acids. I can't rebuild this muscle, so you need to eat more. Then so then what happens is that those signals go to your liver. Your liver is like kind of the metabolic controller, right? It's telling your different parts of your body are requesting things from the liver because the liver is what assembles the amino acids and so on. So then the liver is going, okay, maybe I can replace it with glucose. And your liver starts making more glucose because your muscles are demanding compounds. And so your liver increases IGF, insulin-like growth factor, and glucose production and sends it to the muscles and go, okay, store this as glycogen. Maybe that's what you need. All the while you need more amino acids and it's not coming through and your liver doesn't have the amino acids from the digestive tract.
Wow.
So there's like a big complication around being nutritive depleted and actually your body going into some degree of starvation mode and then stimulating more cravings and more hunger.
Wow.
As a result of that.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with whatever literature there is on protein absorption, but I know that protein digestibility is a massive variable when it comes to the quality of a protein.
Yep.
So that's very interesting that this could hypothetically help you absorb amino acids more efficiently from your protein sources, thereby helping to facilitate muscle protein synthesis, et cetera, et cetera.
Absolutely, yeah. And keep in mind, like protein in the form of chicken or steak is a complex tertiary folded protein, right? It has to be broken down into its individual amino acids. So you have to take this complex protein, which is a muscle, and you have to break it down into its individual subunits, which is amino acids, because that's what we absorb, right? People often think like you're going to absorb chunks of protein. You're not. You have to break them down to amino acids to get the benefit from it. And that requires enough hydrochloric acid to start the digestion in the stomach. Even prior to that, it requires enough chewing. Right? So this is part of the meal hygiene part, right? Where I mentioned you have to sit and chew adequately. You have to coat that protein with your salivary enzymes, and you have to coat it with the IgA that's in the salivary enzymes, right? So your immune system doesn't get activated because proteins and peptides can activate the immune system. So you want to neutralize any potential immune activation that as a result of the protein consumption. So you need to chew, which is the macerating component. It gets into the stomach. You have to have enough hydrochloric acid to break the hydrogen bonds, which is what folds the proteins. So now you unfold the protein like a big string of pearls, and then when it gets into the small intestine, you need to release something called endo and exopeptidases and proteases. Right? So these are the enzymes that break down the protein. And the reason we call them endo and exopeptidases is they start cutting the protein from the inside out and then outside in. And then the proteases, you have to have a variety of them to work at different pHs, because the proximal part of the small bowel, the part that's closest to your stomach, is a very low pH. So you need protease enzymes that work at low pH. And then as you go further and further down the small bowel, the pH increases all the way up to almost 6. So you need proteases that work well at 6 and proteases that work well at 4.
So it starts really acidic and then it ends up getting less so.
Gets less settled. And enzymes are very pH dependent. right? So the proteases, the protein digesting enzymes that work at the pH of 4, closer to the stomach, don't work when you get to the lower parts of the small intestine where the pH is elevated to 6. And 6 and 4 don't sound like a big difference, but this is a log scale, right? So 6 to 4 is 100-fold different in the acidity of the digestive tract. So now you need a variety of enzymes being released in order to break up the protein into its individual amino acids. This is part of the reason why the small bowel is so long, right? It makes up almost 18 to 20 feet because you need time for the food to move through, and that time is required to break things down efficiently. Then finally, as you get towards the end of the small bowel, the protein is broken down into individual amino acids, and then that gets absorbed through the portal vein, and it goes to the liver. In the liver decides what to do with the protein, right? So the liver will use some of the protein to make more enzymes and other compounds that your body needs, but it'll start isolating and sparing branched-chain amino acids and leucine, for example. That's when the muscles are going, hey, I need repair. Then it packages those and sends those towards the muscle, right? And that's how your muscle ends up being able to build its structure again. That's how a steak or a chicken breast becomes a bicep.
Wow.
Right? And it requires this whole elegant process. Digestive bitters play a really important role in every one of those steps.
Every step of the way. Are there foods that contain high concentrations of these bitters?
Yeah, there's a lot. So if you think about yams, for example, yams actually contain a lot of bitter compounds within them. Roots, any sort of root foods, so dandelion root, ginger. Ginger is a powerful bitter. Barberry root, coptis, which is another root, those both contain berberine, which a lot of people know about now, being really good at glucose control and improving insulin sensitivity. Berberine is a bitter. That's how it works, right, through bitter receptor activation. And artichoke contains a lot of bitters in them. Onions contain a lot of bitters in them. So leeks and things like that do as well. And then some fruits, so things like kiwi, and berries. A lot of berries contain bitter compounds in them. Cherry, so this is one of the reasons why tart cherry is really good for your digestive system, right? There's a lot of bitter compounds in the tart cherry. So there are foods that do that. Well, for me, I like to take a supplement in addition to trying to get food, right? Because I want to be very methodical that I'm activating my bitter receptors. The other problem with not activating bitter receptors adequately is you start to lose expression of those receptors, right? You may get to a point down the road where you have fewer bitter receptors. Now the opportunity to activate them goes down. You know, there's this efficiency within your body, right? If we don't use it, we lose it. That's kind of the concept.
Right.
We see that with our muscles, with our brain, with everything else, right? We know that, for example, doing puzzles activates brain and improves neuroplasticity, right? We know exercise and resistance training builds muscles. If we don't do those things, we lose it. Same thing with everything else within the body, including bitter receptors. If we're not activating them, we tend to lose them. And then this becomes a significant problem as we age, because our pancreatic insufficiencies, our liver insufficiencies, our ability to digest and assimilate nutrients goes way down in a time when we need them the most, right? When we're accelerating the aging process. So it's really important for people to keep up with bitter receptor activation.
Amazing. Yeah. I mean, I think it's so important. Again, I can't wait to try. So Just Thrive produces them. What's the name of the product?
So it's Just Thrive Digestive Bitters.
Wow.
They went just super simple. Here's what they are, right? Nothing fancy
I'm
about them.
bummed that you guys haven't sent me them yet, because I'm super excited. I mean, I'm fairly familiar with this research. I mean, It's like great having an expert, such as yourself, to come on and walk us through it so eloquently, and elegantly. But yeah, I'm pumped because
you're getting bottles of it. And here's the thing, you'll experience this next time you go out to Korean, and I would not encourage you to not overeat, right? Because I think there's an important social element to that, right? Because I'm an 80-20 guy, right? I make 20% decisions that are likely bad for me, but I build enough resilience in that 80% where I can deal with it and enjoy the 20%. There's a lot of living that happens in 20%. But take 2 to 3 capsules of the digestive bitters 10 to 15 minutes before you start eating, and you will feel a measurable difference from how you normally feel when you overeat Korean barbecue versus now how you feel, right?
I'm so excited.
And it just shows you the power of the digestive system in controlling and adapting to the food that you're putting in. And likely the reason you don't have bottles yet is because the first batch that they made sold out in weeks.
Wow.
So new batches are in. And I'm sure Tina and team are going to be sending you some.
That's amazing. Yeah. I mean, you guys do such incredible work. And I love knowing that you're the guy pulling the strings and advancing the research and making it, translating it and making it, putting it within grasp of consumers. Because, I mean, this is so important. And again, so many people are walking around today. I mean, you spend any time on social media.
Yeah.
And you see that this is a real epidemic of sorts. People are really struggling globally with digestive discomfort.
People's systems cannot handle food anymore, which is crazy when you think about it,
Yeah.
right? Just think about the number of elimination diets out there and all of that stuff, and really prominent people that talk about how they only eat Jordan Peterson always talks about how he can only eat 2 things.
Yeah.
Right? Or he feels completely terrible. And that's not normal. Right? Our systems are so advanced, so complicated, so diverse that we should be able to eat almost anything and be okay. And we can barely eat staple foods now.
It's a big problem. Well, Kiran, always a pleasure getting you in studio. I just want to actually look up because I know
there's a code for your audience.
There is a code. Do you know it off the top of your head?
I think it's genius, and I think it's 15 or 20% off.
We love that. We love Just Thrive.
Just Thrive Health. Just Thrive Health /genius, I think, and I think the code is genius.
I'm going to confirm right now for my peeps. But yeah, this is so important, and I do know that this is something that many, many people struggle with, and I've struggled with it. I mean, generally my digestion is good, which I'm very grateful for. So yeah. Code Genius Life at checkout. Genius Life at checkout at Just Thrive Health.
Oh, and one thing they mentioned to me is that your discount code, because you've been such a friend to the brand, is not just for this product, it's site-wide.
Cool.
So they put that in the probiotic, the Just Calm, which is a psychobiotic that we talked about in one of the times in one of the episodes. All of those things are, I think, 15% off.
No, it's amazing. Yeah. And people, this is your 3rd time on the show. Every episode that you've been on thus far has just been a home run in terms of your ability to deliver really approachable, actionable, achievable information to my audience with rigorous credibility, research backed, and I appreciate you, and thank you again for coming on and helping to support Little Empty Boxes. Again, it means the world to me.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for this chance to get to talk about bitters.
Of course, brother. And just real quick, do you have a social handle that you want to shout out to my audience?
Yeah, so I try to interact with people as much as I can on Instagram and Facebook. On Instagram, it's at Kiran Biome, KIRANBIOME. I try to put out as much practical information and understandable information out there for people to take charge of their own health. As I mentioned, vast majority of people with digestive issues don't ever seek medical help, and they try to manage it themselves. So I'm trying to empower people with the right information to be able to do that.
Love it. And you do that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for listening. Share this episode around with friends and loved ones that you think may benefit from it. And trying to think if I've got any other housekeeping notes for you. No, just sending love. Hope you're enjoying your summer, and I will catch you on the next episode. Peace.
Awesome.
Yeah, so fun. Hey, if you liked that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.